Chapter 8. The maestro continued sketching from his bed, but his hands were shaky, and his vision betrayed the lines that he saw in his mind's eye. Day after day, his condition got worse. Even his yelling grew weaker. One morning, after working for hours, with everyone coming and going between the studio and the bedroom with paper, pencils, easel, and supports, the maestro gave up on the drawing. Marco and I witnessed it from his bedside. "It's impossible, impossible. I'll never finish it," he said. "The Duke will be so disappointed in me. My God, commissions like this one are few and far between, and now. His voice came to a choking halt, and he leaned back on his pillows. I looked at his sketch. Most of it was a mess. There were only 2 partially completed figures. The maestro had barely begun. "Maestro, maestro," whispered Marco. I ran back to the studio to tell the other boys. "If there's no work, and the maestro can't teach, what will become of us?" asked Baldo, nibbling the heel of a loaf of bread. "It's not just the money," explained Piero. "It's a loss of prestige, too. A well-educated commission brings in more commissions. It's like a chain." Baldo stopped eating. "I'll tell you what I think will become of us. Our lives will be ruined. If we don't finish our apprenticeships, the time we spent here won't count for anything. We'll have to start over. Well, I'll run away first, before anyone can force me to return home." Baldo's words of doom had a silencing effect on us. Even if he was exaggerating, there was some truth to what he said. Later, when I went into the bedroom with new candles, Marco was there trying to finish the drawing to the maestro's impatient instructions. "Make that form a little rounder. The curve of the head should harmonize with the lines of the back and the legs." No, not like that. You don't understand anything, Marco. I don't know what I'm going to do with you. You've been here for so long, yet every day it seems you know less." "Maestro, I'm doing my best," Marco said in a quavering voice. "If you're not even capable of doing the sketch according to my instructions, how are you going to do the fresco? It's impossible. It would be better for me to send a message to the Duke right now so that he can give the commission to another painter. My God, I can't believe it's come to that. Cosimo de Forli turning down a commission." Marco fell to his knees next to the bed and buried his face in the covers. He began crying and hiccuping. As I stood in the doorway, I got up my nerve to say something. "Why don't you hire a specialist?" "A specialist?" howled the maestro. "A specialist in what? Every aspect of painting? It wouldn't be my studio's work then. It would be a stranger's work. It wouldn't even have my style or my color. No, I'd rather give up the commission rather than try to make this shameful mess any better." And with a quick movement, he pulled the covers up to his chin, then turned to face the wall. Marco jumped up and ran out. For some minutes, the only sound was the sputtering of the candles, and off in the distance, Marco's sobbing. I was still standing in the doorway. Suddenly, I had an idea that made my head spin and at the same time seemed extraordinarily perfect. It could be the solution to the maestro's desperate situation, which affected us all, but most important, it might be the one way I could really help Donato. The only problem was how to put my idea into words. "Maestro," I said quietly. A little groan came from the blankets. "I think I have an idea that could save the commission." The candle flames seemed to dance before my eyes. "What is it?" he said gruffly, still facing the wall. "Donato?" I whispered his name. Cosimo sat straight up in bed. "What did you say? Where did you hear that name?" His face drained of its color with an expression so fierce that I felt that the house, Florence, and the whole world were about to fall on my head. I kept silent, not sure of the best way to answer his question. "Well, answer me. How do you know about Donato?" "Maestro," my voice faltered. How could you know about Donato? Melania! He began to get out of bed. The servant came running. "What's going on here?" she bellowed. "Why in the world are you calling me like that? Mother of mercy!" she shouted when she saw the maestro. "Get back in bed. Do you want to lose your insides right here?" "Arduino, how does he know about Donato? What have you told him?" Melania pushed the patient back into his bed and covered him up. She sat in the leather chair and spoke in a firm voice. "Now tell me, what is going on?" The maestro didn't answer. He moved his head from side to side, groaning. He's angry with me because I told him that Donato could help me finish the Duke's commission, I said, without pausing for breath. Melania looked stunned. Then the expression in her eyes seemed to change to one of hope. Do you really think that Donato could do it? I'm sure of it, I answered. Even after so much time without painting? I nodded. Melania moved closer to the bed. Maestro, listen to me. The boy's idea is a good one. But how did he know about Donato? Cosimo repeated. That makes no difference. You know what's important now? To set Donato free, I thought. From the look on Melania's face, I had a feeling that she thought the same thing. For a few minutes, everyone was silent. The maestro closed his eyes. Melania and I waited. Sweat beaded my brow. Finally, the maestro opened his eyes and spoke. His voice was weak. He won't want to do it. He'll only want to kill me. Melania turned to me. What do you think? He'll do it, I said. The maestro sat up in bed and stared into my eyes with his yellowish gaze. You can't be sure, can you? I didn't answer, but kept looking at him. Come now, maestro, Melania said. You have no other choice. Cosimo lay back down and turned his head away from us. Give him the keys, he said. Melania pulled a cord out from the folds of her skirt and untied the large key at the end of it. This is the key to the attic door. She handed it to me. Then she went to the trunk and took out a wooden box which held a smaller key, the one to Donato's shackle. The keys! Without wasting another second, I turned and ran to the stairs. I talked in a rush, telling Donato everything that had happened as I fought with the rusty lock on the attic door. Donato listened quietly from the other side. When I finally pushed the door open, he crawled over to me, took my hand and kissed it. The gesture embarrassed me. He was my true maestro, and here he was kissing my hand, thanking me. I knelt down and hugged him. He felt frail, like a child in my arms. Though we were both overwhelmed with emotion, neither of us said a word. I pulled away and took out the key to the shackle. Finally freed, Donato stood up, brushed his tattered clothes, and embraced me again. I knew you would help me, Arduino. I knew you would find a way. Together we walked out the door and down the stairs. Donato's legs were weak from inactivity, so he leaned on my arm to steady himself. With his other hand he held tightly to the rope banister. We slowly made our way to the bedroom, then stopped just outside the door. Donato wiped his brow, raised his chin, and walked in, alone. Melania moved aside as he approached the bed. Donato, whispered the maestro in a trembling voice. Donato seemed to be taking in the maestro's appearance. His gray hair, his tired eyes, surrounded with wrinkles of worry, and his pale, crumpled mouth. Maestro, he said in a strange voice. Donato, Cosimo repeated. I have been unjust with you. I didn't want... I was afraid, and I let my jealousy get the better of me. Your art blinded me. God forgive me. Donato sighed deeply, rubbed his hands, and said, Give me something to eat and a bath, and I will begin. But, the maestro began confusedly. Where is the sketch? Arduino will show it to you, the maestro said. Allowing some hope to creep into his voice, Melania had already left the room to fetch some food and to prepare the bath. Donato soaked in the tub for nearly an hour. After he dressed and ate, we headed into the studio. Donato seemed to be walking on clouds. He looked around the room, his eyes shining. Every detail, even as small as the nicked corner of a table, seemed to fill him with emotion. Maestro, I said as I came up to him, here is the sketch. I pointed toward it. Maestro, Donato repeated. He ignored where I had pointed but looked into my eyes with an indefinable expression. Then he smiled. It was joy. Just then Marco, who had been sitting on his stool with his face buried in his hands, lifted his head and looked at Donato with shock. You! Good afternoon, Marco, said Donato merrily. The color drained from Marco's face. Donato, where have you been? What are you doing here? Donato grinned. Don't worry, I'm nothing more than a ghost. Marco let out a shrill scream and then ran out into the hallway. Only a ghost, Donato said to himself. He's still a genius, Donato said when he saw the maestro's sketch. What? I said. I couldn't believe Donato was impressed with the maestro's meager efforts. Cosimo still has his talent, he said. His bad temper, bitterness, and avarice haven't managed to kill his art. The only thing that doesn't fit are these lines. They seem less inspired, clumsy even. Marco drew that part. I explained, amazed at how he immediately saw the distinction. Poor Marco, he commented, lowering his voice. He'll never be a good painter. He works hard, though, I said, and Cosima teaches him more than he does everyone else. Donato took one of the charcoals that I had prepared for him and rolled it between his fingers. Marco is a very proud boy. Once, during a rare friendly moment, he told me a little about himself. He said his family has more distinguished ancestors than money, though they have plenty of that too. They wanted Marco to be a military officer, but he refused. The priesthood or painting were his only other options. He chose painting even though he doesn't have a real talent or passion for it. His family pays Cosima quite a lot to keep him on. I wonder what he would really like to do. Donato shrugged. Who knows? Maybe he'd like to watch the time pass between the strings of his lute. I kept silent. Donato was drawing, and all the problems, miseries, and fears that had weighed me down disappeared as I watched him work. His clearly drawn lines, soft shadows, and crisp contrasts were magical. After working for hours, Donato finally stood up from the work table. He sighed and straightened his shirt. Do you remember what I told you, Arduino? He said. You must see the work as a whole, yet evaluate the intensity of each of the elements in the picture. He backed up a few paces and bumped into Baldo and Piero, who had been looking over his shoulder, open-mouthed. Baldo sat down on the floor with a smack. We looked at one another without knowing what to say, and suddenly all four of us burst out laughing. It was the best introduction possible between my new maestro and my companions.